UFOs, the CIA, and the Robertson panel. On December 2nd, 1952, the CIA's Assistant Director R.H. Marshall Caldwell noted in a classified report on UFO activity in American airspace, quote, sightings of unexplained objects at great altitudes and traveling at high speeds in the vicinity of major U.S. defense installations are of such nature that they are not attributable to natural phenomenon or known types of aerial vehicles, end quote. Believing that something already really might be afoot in the skies of America, Chadwell prepared a list of saucer-themed recommendations for the National Security Council. Quote, the Director of Central Intelligence shall formulate and carry out a program of intelligence and research activities as required to solve the problem of instant positive identification of unidentified flying objects. Upon call of the Director of Central Intelligence, government departments and agencies shall provide assistance in this program of intelligence and research to the extent of their capacity provided. However, that the DCI shall avoid duplication of activities presently directed towards the solution of this problem. This effort shall be coordinated with the military services and the Research and Development Board of the Department of Defense, with the Psychological Board and other government agencies as appropriate. The Director of Central Intelligence shall disseminate information concerning the program of intelligence and research activities in this field to the various departments and agencies which have authorized interest therein, end quote. 48 hours later, the Intelligence Advisory Committee concurred with Chadwell and recommended that, quote, the services of selected scientists to review and appraise the available evidence in the light of pertinent scientific theories, end quote, should be the order of the day. Thus was born what became known as the Robertson panel, so named after the man chosen to head the inquiry, Howard Percy Robertson, a consultant to the agency, a renowned physicist, and a director of the Defense Department Weapon Evaluation Group. Chadwell was tasked with putting together a crack team of experts in various science, technical, intelligence, and military disciplines, and have them carefully study the data on flying saucers currently held by not just the CIA, but the Air Force as well, who obligingly agreed to hand over all their UFO files for the CIA's scrutiny, or at least the Air Force said it was all they had. Whatever the truth of the matter regarding the extent of which the U.S. Air Force shared its files with Chadwell's team, the fact that there was a significant body of data to work with was the main thing. And so the team, which included Luis Alvarez, physicist and radar expert and later Nobel Prize recipient, Frederick C. Durant, CIA officer, secretary to the panel and missile report expert, Samuel Abraham Goudsmit, Brookhaven National Laboratory's nuclear physicist, and Thornton Page, astrophysicist, radar expert, and deputy director of Johns Hopkins Operations Research Office, quickly got to work. The overall conclusion of the Robertson panel was that while UFOs per se did not appear to have a bearing on national security or the defense of the United States, the way in which the subject could be used by potentially hostile nations to manipulate the public mindset and disrupt the U.S. military infrastructure did have a bearing, and a major one too, on matters of security nature. According to the panel's members, quote, although evidence of any direct threat from these sightings was wholly lacking, related dangers might well exist resulting from a misidentification of actual enemy artifacts by defense personnel, overloading of emergency reporting channels with false information, subjectivity of public to mass hysteria, and greater vulnerability to possible enemy psychological warfare. There was also a recommendation that a number of public UFO investigative groups that existed in the United States at the time, such as the Civilian Flying Saucer Investigation, CFCSI, and the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, should be watched carefully due to the, quote, apparent irresponsibility and the possible use of such groups for subversive purposes, end quote. The panel concluded that a public education campaign should be undertaken, on matters relative to UFOs. Specifically, agreed the members, such a program would result in a reduction in public interest in flying saucers, which today evokes a strong psychological reaction. This education could be accomplished by mass media such as television, motion pictures, and popular articles. Basis of such education could be actual case histories which had been puzzling at first but later explained. As in the case of conjured tricks, there is much less stimulation if the secret is known. Such a program should tend to reduce the current gullibility of the public and consequently their susceptibility to clever, hostile propaganda. Quote, in this connection, Dr. Hadley Cantrill, Princeton University, was suggested. Cantrill authored The Invasion from Mars, a study of the psychology of panic, written about the famous Orson Welles radio broadcast in 1938, and has since performed advanced laboratory studies in the field of perception. The names of Don Marquis in the University of Michigan and Leo Roston were mentioned as possible suitable as consultant psychologists. Also, someone familiar with mass communication techniques, perhaps an advertising expert, would be helpful. Arthur Godfrey was mentioned as possibly a valuable channel of communication, reaching a mass audience of certain levels. Dr. Berkner suggested the U.S. Navy ONR Special Devices Center, Sands Point, Long Island, as a potentially valuable organization to assist in such an educational program. The teaching techniques used by this agency for aircraft identification during the past war were cited as an example of a similar educational task. The Jam Handy Company, which made World War II training films, motion picture and slide strips, was also suggested, as well as Walt Disney Inc. animated cartoons, end quote. Robbie Graham, UFO researcher, who has carefully studied the many and various intricacies of the Robertson panel and is linked to Disney, and a man named Ward Kimball says, quote, the panel's singling out of Disney made sense, given the animation giant's then firmly established working relationship with the U.S. government. During World War II, Disney made numerous propaganda shorts for the U.S. military, and in the 1950s, corporation and government sponsors helped the company produce films promoting President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace policy, as well as the retrospectively hilarious Duck and Cover documentary, which depicted school children surviving an atomic attack by sheltering under their desks, end quote. Graham continued, quote, that the Robertson panel highlighted Disney is significant in that the panel's general recommendation to debunk UFOs through media channels is known to have been acted upon in at least one instance, this being the CBS TV broadcast of UFOs, Friend, Foe, or Fantasy, 1966, an anti-UFO documentary narrated by Walter Cronkite. In a letter addressed to former Robertson panel secretary Frederick C. Durant, Dr. Thornton Page confided that he helped organize a CBS TV show around the Robertson panel conclusions, even though this was 13 years after the panel had first convened. In light of this case alone, it seems reasonable to assume that the government may at least have attempted to follow through on the Robertson panel's Disney recommendation. As for Ward Kimball, in 1979, he went public on certain aspects of Disney's links to the UFO conundrum and officialdom, and stated that it was not just the CIA that Disney was working with when it came to UFOs. At some point during the 1955 or 1956, Disney was contacted by representatives of the U.S. Air Force and was asked to secretly cooperate on a documentary about the UFO controversy. As part of the deal, the Air Force offered to supply actual UFO footage, which Disney was told they could include in their film. According to Kimball, at the time it was not at all unusual for either Walt Disney or his studio to go along with the government's wishes, or perhaps demands might be a far more accurate terms to use. Kimball revealed how, during the Second World War, the military practically took over Disney's Burbank facilities, where dozens of hours of military training productions and war effort films featured Disney characters like Donald Duck were made. The studio began work on the requested UFO documentary, and animators were asked to imagine what an alien would look like. Meanwhile, Walt Disney himself eagerly waited for the Air Force to deliver the promised film of actual UFOs. At the last moment, however, the Air Force mysteriously withdrew the offer of the footage, and the planned documentary was then cancelled. This is by Nick Redfern, Mysterious Universe on Bended Reality. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.